Welcome everyone to the latest installment of the Collaborative Circle presented by the Long Island Collaborative Divorce Professionals, the LICDP. Today's topic is It's All About the Children, and we'll consider how the collaborative process can really serve to benefit the children in divorcing families. Joining me today to discuss this are my colleagues and friends, Concetta Spirio, Collaborative Divorce Attorney, Donna Lascala, Financial Neutral, Amy Reinstein-Augenstein, Family Support Specialist. So Concetta, let's start off the conversation today with you because as the collaborative attorney in this discussion, perhaps you could elaborate on how the collaborative process differs from the traditional litigation model when it comes to the children.
Absolutely. Thank you, Jackie. And it's wonderful to be here. Well, in litigation, and that's the court system, it's a contested matter. And the court really doesn't get involved other than the bare basics unless there's a major problem. So the bare basics, the court is going to make sure that child custody is addressed, support is addressed, that's a statutory creature, meaning the statute dictates how that's calculated, and visitation. And the children never have a voice in this process. Definitely not in the court system unless, again, there's a problem where, you know, whether you're in family court for something, the children are not in the courthouse, they're not addressed, and their voice is not heard, so to speak, other than what comes through the filter of the attorney that is representing the parent that the parent is speaking with. So it's like telephone, okay? You're going to be getting their version of what's happening. But the court really doesn't get involved. It's really up to the parties to work things out. And that always isn't the easiest way done in litigation. And unfortunately, too many people will use their children as a weapon. And that I have really no tolerance personally for. And obviously, when I do litigation, I don't put up with that. But just by fact of seeking custody, that sometimes triggers a lot in a litigation, because that's a way to push buttons or make a leverage to get power to do something, because if custody is really important to one party and the other party wants to use it to leverage that person, it can get complicated. Going back to the bare basics, it doesn't touch on things that are practical and the real realities of raising children. For instance, the child support and custody only go to certain periods of time. Custody only goes to a child who's 18. Child support only goes till they're 21, 22 if they're in college, and the parents agree to cover them through while they're in college. So it doesn't cover all the extras that, you know, the realities of life bring. What's great about the collaborative process, it's focused on this family and finding out how they want their future to look, even through the divorce process and then thereafter, and takes into consideration things like, oh, what are we doing with college? And in today's day, a real issue for children is they come back from college, they're not leaving the nest necessarily. In today's world, they can't afford to be self-sufficient many times. So who's taking care of that responsibility? The court usually doesn't address that at all. And that's one thing that's great about the collaborative process. You can really go into other areas and make sure there's a whole contextual thing of how everything is covered.
That's great. It really sounds like you're able to get into the specifics of a particular family in a way that maybe the court system wouldn't be able to do.
Absolutely. And the court system is really not interested in spending time with you. What people don't realize is the court doesn't hear from the people that are the parties until they're on the stand in a trial. They only get, you know, their voices heard through their attorneys, and it's very limited.
Right, right. That's such a good point. Donna, if you could tell us a little bit about how the financial neutral in a collaborative case would handle the financial matters that pertain specifically to the children.
The court is very specific when it comes to issues regarding the children, but very limited. They do address child support. They do address custody. They do address things like support for college to a degree, but it's very limited and very specific and not able to expand to the actual need of that child or that family. It also does not address other issues, as Conchetta mentioned, like extracurricular activities. And as we know today, especially, our children are involved in many extracurricular activities, and some of them are at quite an expense. Travel teams, competitions, other things that everyone is involved in, and it's not addressed in the normal child support agreement as far as who's going to be responsible for those extra expenses. One of the interesting things that we've seen is, as Conchetta mentioned, a child coming back from college, maybe they're 21 or 22, they're not self-supporting. More often than not, they're moving back home with the parent. So if the parents are getting divorced when the child is in college, that issue needs to be addressed as far as who is the child going to live with, and then who's going to be responsible for those expenses. Because again, we know that they're not inexpensive. And especially now that children can stay on their parents' insurance policy, health insurance policy, until they're 26 years old, that's an expense that needs to be addressed. So one of the interesting things that you can do in a collaborative setting as a financial neutral is take assets that may be legally off the table and put them back on the table. For instance, something like a current inheritance or a future inheritance. If there is a huge disparity between assets in the case of each of those parents, if one parent knows that they are inheriting, have inherited, or about to inherit a large sum of money, they might be willing in a collaborative setting to say, you know what, that money's back on the table. That's going to go towards the college expense because I know my mom and my dad would have wanted me to use that money to send our kid through college. And just because we're getting divorced doesn't mean that the grandchild should suffer. In a traditional litigated setting, the attorney for that parent is probably going to say to them, wait a minute, inherited assets are off the table. That's separate property. But it doesn't necessarily mean that it's benefiting this family as it should. There's an expectation of lifestyle that can be discussed and say, okay, so we've got all of these assets. We've got retirement assets. We've got inherited assets. We've got cash. We've got business interest. How can we use everything that is in the family resources to actually serve the needs of the child? Yeah, what's yours is yours and what's mine is mine, but that's not addressing the need of our child or our children. So when you sit down as a collaborative neutral, you really don't have a bias, or you should not have a bias, toward either one of the parents and say, look, here's everything that's available. How are we going to make it work? And usually what I do is I work out several different scenarios for the parents so that we can say, okay, so if we take one from column A and two from column B and we mush these together, is this going to be what the family needs? And how do we make this work in a really truly equitable distribution with the needs of the child or children in mind? And one more thing, you talk about college. The standard is usually the parents split, especially in New York State, the parents split whatever the SUNY maximum is. So let's say the SUNY maximum is $26,000. Each parent is responsible for $13,000 of that tuition, room, and board. But how many kids are actually going to SUNY schools? A lot of kids go to out-of-state schools or private schools, and we all know that that tuition is much more expensive. So how is that need addressed? Again, at the collaborative table, the financial neutral can address all of those issues and show them, all right, this is what you're really committing to. How are we going to make this work?
Thank you, Donna. Amy, as the family support specialist, how do you work in a collaborative setting to really bring the needs of the children to the forefront?
Thank you so much, Jackie. I'm so glad to be here with my colleagues to really talk about this important issue. I really can't emphasize enough the importance, I feel, of the family support specialist when it comes to the children in a collaborative divorce. Studies have shown time after time that high conflict between parents is one of the biggest predictors of children having problems going forward. After all, we're concerned right now with the settlement process and getting them through it and getting to an agreement. But the children live with, with these parents for the rest of their lives. So it is so important, I feel, to start a template and a model for how parents can communicate with each other effectively during this process, and hopefully it can endure for the years to come, because although the marriage is ending or the relationship is ending, they're going to be co-parents forever. So our family support specialists are mental health specialists, and they're trained. We're usually psychologists, clinical social workers in our group, and we're really trained in family systems, conflict resolution, child development, to be able to talk to the parents during the process about what their concerns are individually about their children, and then to help them talk about it together. Usually at the time of divorce, the communication is not particularly good between the parents, and we are really there to help them, learn how to communicate better with each other, especially when it comes to the children. I have to also emphasize, in the court system, often in litigated divorces, a lot of times the focus is on younger children, the parenting plans for the younger children, and the older children are sometimes just left out of the equation, but they are very impacted by parents' divorce. And, this can sometimes come about in relation to, the important events of their life, graduation, high school, college, their marriages, their having children. And, the goal of the family specialist is to help the parents, again, during the settlement process, but also to think about their children's needs in the years ahead so they can continue to co-parent. And what we're looking to try to help avoid are the things that kids can be impacted with by a parent's conflictual divorce. And, what we see is a real uptick in behavior disorders, problems in school, self-esteem issues, anxiety, depression, and we're ever mindful of that. And so we're really trying to help the parents, again, focus on that, not so much the conflict with the other parent, but remembering, the children are very affected by it. So again, divorce is an extremely emotional experience. Even parents that really want this, even if both parents want it, it doesn't mean that they're not filled with a lot of emotion, anger, resentment, hurt, guilt. And what the family support specialist is there to do is to help support them through, through those feelings, and help them not let those feelings impact their ability to talk with each other, communicate, and come to a resolution. And of course, we also help the other professionals. We work collaboratively, that's the model, with the other attorneys, the financial neutrals, to make them aware after we've had an opportunity to speak either individually, usually we'll speak individually with both parents, then together, and then bring it back to the team and explain to the team what the triggers are for these parents, what their concerns are, what their fears are, so that when we meet together as a team to help negotiate the settlement, everybody's really aware of, what the concerns are for each parent. So it's very personal, and that makes it so different than, as Conchetta was alluding to before, the court system. So again, just to focus specifically on what do we do, we're introducing conflict resolution skills. We're making parents and then the team aware of the trigger points. We're providing emotional support. It's not therapy, but it's emotional support during one of the most difficult times in the families that we work with's lives. We keep the process collaborative. If things start to go a little awry, we try to bring it back, and remember to focus on the goals. Again, we can also we help with the parenting plans. That's another very important aspect of what we do. And frankly, that can be much less expensive for the parents. Instead of, working it out with the two attorneys that usually have a higher hourly rate, they can meet with the family support specialist and who's, again, very trained in child development, and really, again, tailor an agreement that works for this family. What are their schedules? What are their needs? What are they worried about with their children? How do their children adapt to change? We're now helping them transition from a one family household, 1 to 2. and there's a lot involved in that. Sometimes a child specialist can also be brought in. A child specialist would be somebody in the collaborative process who actually speaks directly to the children. Again, not as a therapist, but just, and again, in a confidential manner. So different than a court system where someone might be a forensic that's going to prepare a report for the court. It's all done confidentially, where they're just trying to get a feel from the children of, you know, how this is impacting them and letting their voices be heard. And then the child specialist can go back to the parents and the team and share some of what the children are experiencing. And I think that's very helpful in, you know, again, keeping the parents on track to focus on the needs of the children and less on the other parent. So, you know, again, as you know, to sort of echo what Conchetta and Donna were saying, you know, we're trying to get away from a win-lose mentality, because a win-lose mentality is really a loss for the children. They're not going to experience that well. And that's, you know, what will cause, you know, some problems for them in the future that we're trying to avoid.
It's interesting, the point that Amy brings up as far as older children. The court specifically will tell you, you know, your child over the age of 18 is no longer legally your responsibility. And I find that just horrifying because, you know, as we've all said, first of all, what 18-year-old these days is emotionally, physically, mentally able to be completely independent of their parents. You know, the other part of the problem is that they're then sort of tying your hands as far as what you can negotiate in a litigated divorce, because they're basically telling you, you know, we don't have time for this, we're not addressing this, move on to the next thing. So that's really why with parents and with divorcing parents that have older children, and we're talking, you know, anywhere from 18 and up, if you really want to address the needs of your children, the collaborative process is really the perfect process for you. In addition to which, if you have a child with special needs, if you have an adult child with special needs, there are certain things that can be discussed and taken care of and done in the collaborative process that the litigated process does not even give you the time or space to deal with. Setting up special needs trusts and who's going to fund it and where is that money coming from and how is this special needs child going to be taken care of for the rest of their lives. That's a commitment that both parents should be making and looking at during the divorce process. Also, you know, the LGBTQ community with their unique needs as far as their children are concerned, where there may or may not be one biological parent and one adoptive parent. There are very unique needs that can be addressed and financial needs that need to be discussed that the traditional system does not allow. But at the collaborative table, we can all sit down as a team. And I really think that's the most crucial part of this. We can all sit down as a team and come up with solutions and suggestions for the parents in these unique situations.
True. What both Donna and Amy have said. First of all, the court is not used to dealing with non-traditional families at all. And the lesbian and gay and bisexual community, they don't have a clue. It's the worst place for those families to be is the court system. And like Amy said, and I want to stress this, first of all, the family specialist is essential. And it really saves the clients money because when they're dealing with these hot and, you know, emotional issues, it's not the place for them to filter that through two attorneys, even though there may be collaborative attorneys. The collaborative attorneys are better suited to do it because they're approaching it differently. If you were in the court system, they're doing it from an advocate's standpoint. So they're feeding the fuel of the fire rather than trying to, you know, bring down the temperature and make it work.
Right. Right. These are all excellent points. I feel like we could go on and talk about this. And I know that we all agree that in these cases, the children are the most important aspect. And it really sounds, I know that we all would agree also that collaborative is a way to better serve those families with children.
Absolutely.
You know,
Yeah.
I have to just add, Jackie, that, you know, sometimes we don't know if our work endures, but in the recent COVID pandemic, what I have found, and it's really heartwarming to me, is that the families that I've worked with in the collaborative model and also in a mediation model, they did very well during the pandemic, that we're still, experiencing. Now, all of a sudden, schedules changed. Children were now home from school. Parents were working from home or sometimes unemployed. Some were essential workers. There were safety issues. There were changes in schedules, and the courts were closed. So, if you were relying on a court system to sort of resolve your parenting schedule, you would really not be getting satisfaction. But what I found is that the parents I work with collaboratively, we had set a template, and they did well. They readjusted their schedules. They discussed it. They talked about the safety issues related to the children. And again, to me, that shows the tremendous success of this model, that it's not just about getting that agreement done. It doesn't end there, but how they behave in all the years ahead. And that's what is going to benefit the children the most.
Absolutely. And the tools that they get from those sessions with the family specialist is invaluable.
Such good points. Well, all right, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for another excellent discussion. Please remember to check out our website, to follow our group on social media. We're the Long Island Collaborative Divorce Professionals. And please don't ever hesitate to reach out to any of the professionals in our group. We'd all be so happy to discuss any of these issues with you further. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Jackie.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Good to see everybody.
Same here.